How well do you keep up with local news? Do you view your local news straight from the source or through social media? Do you even have a reliable news source in your area? The chances are you don't have many news sources in your area, or maybe you don't have any at all. My name is Kiara Weaver, and I am a graduate student for the Liberal Studies program at Duke University with a focus in journalism. For my master's project, I am answering the question, how are local newspaper companies diminishing the odds of communities becoming news deserts in North Carolina? Even though there is much research on the decline of local newspaper companies, the 3 North Carolina businesses I spoke with described a more nuanced response that includes room for hope for local journalism. 3 companies I spoke with are the Indy Week, Border Belt Independent, and the Daily Tar Heel. Throughout this film, you will hear from these organizations about their company, while also getting some insight to the state of local news through recent research. Since the early 2000s up to now, around 2,500 newspapers have disappeared in the U.S. That's a rate of about 2 newspapers closing weekly. Factors that had a detrimental impact on newspapers were the Great Recession, rise in social media, and the COVID-19 pandemic. These factors played a big part when it came to finding sustainable funding models and maintaining and developing audiences. Funding and audience engagement are 2 main features that many newspaper companies rely on to stay in business. In the U.S., 200 counties do not have a local newspaper, and nearly 50% of counties only have 1 newspaper, usually a weekly, and more than 6% of counties have no dedicated news coverage at all. As of 2019, there are 43 newspapers in North Carolina that publish daily and 111 newspapers that publish weekly, coming out to a total of 154 newspapers. This does not include college newspapers in North Carolina. There are currently 24 that publish during the academic year. Speaking of college newspapers, research shows that college newspapers could be key in curbing this increase in news deserts as they report community news in which their college is located. According to Nieman Lab, an estimated 10% of state capitol reporters across the nation are students. I spoke with the Daily Tar Heel to hear their story and current state.
My name is Courtney Mitchell, and I am the General Manager and a News Advisor for the Daily Tar Heel. We're here to serve a very specific audience, which is the local university and also the community that surrounds us, which is Chapel Hill and Carrboro. And we're an official student organization. We're an off-campus student organization, but we are here simply to serve this very particular campus audience first and foremost, and then everyone else around us. A lot of student publications are housed in student affairs or under a journalism school. We're actually independent. We have been student fee free since 1993. We've been our own 501c3 nonprofit since 1989. So student publications differ from other publications, and then we differ from also a lot of other student publications in how we're set up. But at the same time, we are the paper of record for this community. We are the only print paper serving Chapel Hill and Carrboro. So that sets us apart too. The way we stay funded is a mix of a couple of different revenue streams. We've got print and digital advertising. We split those out, but they would make up a big portion of what we bring in. Fundraising is our biggest single source of revenue. It makes up about 42% of our budget. We also have an internal marketing agency called the 1893 Brand Studio, and that brings in about 10% of our revenue every year. Then we have a couple of other little things that help us out. Newspaper sales, say if we win a big game, if we beat Duke, we'll take those papers to the pit, to the center of campus, and sell those, and also put them in our online store. And in our online store, we also sell other commemorative papers, t-shirts, mugs. So we try to do whatever we can to bring in whatever we can. The way we are set up is right now with 2.5 professional employees. That's me, the general manager and news advisor. We have a revenue and growth director, and then we have a part-time bookkeeper. That's the professional side of the staff. Under that, everyone else is students. We have the editorial side, all run by students. We have student advertising directors, and we have a student business staff. Those are work study students here at the university, and they help perform essential business functions for us. The Daily Tar Heel became completely independent in 1993. That's when we divested from student fees. The general manager at the time actually spent a couple of years working on that to make sure that we would have the revenue that we needed if indeed we lost that revenue stream. Being free from student fees and being out of a financial structure from the university actually protects our editorial freedom. That means that if the students write something that is critical of the administration, they don't have to worry that the administration is going to remove their student fees, which would have been a large source of funding. Not every college paper across the nation is independent. We are. A lot of papers being able to have those student fees mean that they don't have to fundraise or that they don't worry about money, maybe as much as we do. But it's very important to us to be independent of that to protect our editorial freedom. Many of our staff are paid. Over the course of a year, we might see around 200 students come through the Daily Tar Heel in many different roles. About 80 of those students receive some sort of financial support from us. The students who work for the newspaper, who are what we call masthead or upper masthead, assistant editors, and then management of the paper, they're all paid a stipend to do that job. Our advertising staff gets an hourly wage and they also get commission. Our agency staff also gets an hourly wage, and our student business people are work study students and they get that federal funding. So some of them are paid, but not all of them are paid. And I will say, none of them would say they are paid enough. And I agree with that, but we pay them what we can. The biggest expense in our annual budget by far are salaries and benefits. All of the things that come with employing people. That's what we spend the most money on. After that, it's our rent and utilities. We're technically off campus. We are on Franklin Street, which is kind of the main drive that runs through campus, so we're close enough to walk to, but being off campus means we pay rent. After that, it's printing and distribution. And after that, we have some smaller expenses like travel and events. But by far, it's salaries that we spend the most money on. The Daily Tar Heel was born on February 23rd, 1893. It started out being called the Tar Heel. It was actually built to follow athletics, and then it grew into something more pretty quickly from there. So we just turned 131 years old. A lot of publications were really hit hard during COVID. However, the Daily Tar Heel was really okay. One of the reasons is because during the pandemic, a lot of people were very, very concerned about the institutions that they loved, and they wanted to make sure that they would stay around. So the Daily Tar Heel actually had a great fundraising year during the pandemic. Also, the students did an incredible job covering the university during that time. And something that we see is when the news is really essential, we do really well financially. The students wrote an editorial that criticized the university's reopening, and it led with the print headline, UNC has a clusterfuck on its hands, and that related to the word cluster, which was a cluster of people who were affected by COVID, and it went really viral. The students were on national media, and that also led to us getting quite a bit of donations. The Daily Tar Heel newspaper staff right now has about 200 people. On the ad staff, we have 7, and the brand studio probably has around 30, and we have 5 work study students. And then above that, we have 2.5 professional members of the staff, the general manager, the revenue director, and a bookkeeper. Daily Tar Heel is still in print. So the daily part of our publication actually is online, and then we have a weekly print. For many, many years, the Daily Tar Heel printed 5 days a week. And then slowly, as advertising revenue began to dwindle, we decided to pull back print and went from 5 days a week to 4 to 3. And then in the pandemic, went down to 1 paper a week. That actually wasn't a financial decision. That was simply because there was no one here on campus to pick it up. It was a really good move because it's helped the students think through, okay, what should a weekly paper look like? And that's very manageable to them. So sometimes people will ask us, well, when will print go away? Because a lot of people are doing away with print. I think that when a print product is essential and feels essential to people, it still very much matters. And one thing that I have told the students here is we won't likely stop printing simply because it's a financial decision. It will be when people stop picking it up from boxes. We'll know that it's not something that matters to them anymore and that that's how we should pivot. At the same time, going down to 1 weekly paper and looking at the world around us, the students have done a great job of continuing to have a digital transformation, better multimedia, better audio and video, a better web product, and better SEO on the web to make sure that that's impactful for people too. We know one day we will be all digital, but we don't really see that happening yet, not in the near future. One thing that is very special about the Daily Tar Heel is a legacy of local coverage. We tend to have a really impactful city and state desk every year, and they hand that legacy down and teach it throughout the desk to become really, really good at covering the issues of our local community. They go to the school board meetings, they go to the city and town council meetings, and they really dig into what are the issues of that community. I actually find that to be very, very interesting because those students actually have to work the hardest to understand and meet audience needs because they are working for an audience that really has nothing to do with them. If you're covering sports, this is a student audience. If you're covering university, this is a student audience, and you know how to be a part of that group. But to really accurately cover the issues of Carrboro and Chapel Hill and Orange County, you have to work a little bit harder to understand what are the concerns there, what are the audience needs there. We just had a great election night a couple nights ago. We ordered pizza, the students were here late, the city and state desk and the data desk, creating really impactful coverage that matters to those communities. And we are the only print newspaper in this area anymore that specifically covers this group. So we know our local audience is at the bus stop, reading our paper from the blue boxes. We hear from them all the time. We have a newsletter called the OC Report that is strictly for that audience. And we hear from those readers all the time. Thank you so much for the work that you're doing. It makes me really proud of those students because I can tell they are taking their job of serving an audience so seriously. We've actually not seen a ton of partnerships from other area newspapers, but one way that we have partnered in coverage, one is our rivalry challenge with the Chronicle. The students work together to create one big issue, 132-page issue on the first UNC Duke game of the year. And then our editor-in-chief, Emmy Martin, got a $10,000 grant this year from the Solutions Journalism Network to create a collaborative paper with other college media organizations across the state. So we've seen those sorts of coverage collaborations with other college papers, but we haven't really seen any other local papers reach out to us to have coverage collaborations, though those local organizations do often hire our students for internships. And that's one way we feel good about what we're contributing to the local news ecosystem is these are students who are well prepared to be out in the world, and then we can send them for the summer to do really good jobs at these other papers too. The Daily Tar Heel covers first and foremost the campus of the University of North Carolina here in Chapel Hill, but we also cover Chapel Hill, Carrboro, Greater Orange County, and some of Chatham County. So it goes out probably around 25 to 30 miles around us. I don't think the Daily Tar Heel particularly ends up being a part of a coverage bubble where we're only covering the university and we're not seeing the local community around us. We do have a really great legacy of local coverage for all of those towns around us. One reason why I think that's particularly important is that it introduces the students who are here on this campus to what's around them. They might only be here for 4 years, but they impact the town that is around them. Those so-called town gown issues, right? Where we want to make sure that people understand that they are part of an actual community and that they can contribute to that community in so many different ways. So I think that we do a great job of covering those local communities, and I hope that it does more than serve those particular audiences. I hope that it also really informs the students who live here about the place that they're living. Since 1893, the Daily Tar Heel was on campus until around 2009. The last place that we resided on campus was in the Student Union. That's when I was a student at the Daily Tar Heel. I worked in the Student Union. It was a great location. One of the reasons why the Daily Tar Heel decided to move off campus was remaining in that space meant an annual process of having to find out if we're still going to be allowed to be in that space. The professional staff would have to work with student government to come up with an agreement year after year after year. At the time, the Daily Tar Heel was flush with money, $1.5 million in the bank, no end in sight to what the revenue of advertising could do. They definitely had money to be able to move off campus, but be very closely located to campus so students could walk there and just pay their rent and not have to worry year to year. Is the student government going to decide, you know what, the Daily Tar Heel doesn't have to be here anymore and we've got a month to figure it out. That's when the original decision was made to move to a building that we're no longer in, but is very close to this one and was a really gorgeous building, a great place to be. The rent was $9,000 a month, and as advertising dollars really continued to slump, it was very, very clear that we couldn't afford that anymore. But we couldn't get back on campus. I've had multiple conversations with people about how we could possibly get back on campus, and I don't think that the Daily Tar Heel, say, burned a bridge by leaving campus or that people don't want us on campus. It's more like if you move, you lose, right? And there are more people on campus than there ever have been, and there's not enough space for even the, organizations that are supported by student fees to be there. So we've remained off campus on Franklin Street, really closely located so people can get to us, and in a building that has a rent that we can afford. When it comes to the future, I am really, really optimistic about the future of news as long as we are here to train them. The Daily Tar Heel and other college media organizations, this is the deepest end of the pool. They're doing things that they're not going to do in class. They are filing records requests. They're going to the courthouse. They are following everything that they can. They're getting the kind of criticism that professional journalists get. They're students, but they're doing a professional job. So when other organizations are looking to see who they're going to hire, the Daily Tar Heel, like a lot of other college papers, actually has produced students who are higher up on that ladder of how prepared they are to go right into a newspaper and right into serving another community. That's the thing I am most optimistic about here at the Daily Tar Heel. The thing I'm the most concerned about is, where does the money come from long term? The Daily Tar Heel for so many years had this one giant revenue stream. That was advertising. That was a paper that came out 5 days a week, and it was full of advertising. 2 pages of classified ads, multiple pages of ads. That was a lot of money, and it was something that the Daily Tar Heel relied on for a long time. But the world moved into a digital transformation, and a lot of people said, I don't actually need to advertise in a newspaper. I can have my own social media channels. I can have my own way of marketing myself or marketing my business. So that's something that started to drop in 2011, 2012, and continued to drop extremely. Ever since then, the Daily Tar Heel has been trying to figure out, what does our revenue mix look like? And we know what it looks like right now. Some print advertising, some digital, a lot of fundraising. Is there a larger revenue stream out there that we haven't explored, that we haven't found? We're actually not the only paper going through this, and college media is not the only area that's going through this. It's an entire industry-wide problem. So when will we be able to feel like we have sustainability, that we can take a breath, that we know what's coming year to year? Right now, it actually feels like a hustle, and it's a hustle that's really worth it, but that's my biggest concern for the future. Where does that revenue come from long term? What the Daily Tar Heel needs most are resources. There are a lot of things that I think that we could do to not only inform our audiences better here, but also be part of building the sustainability of local news. And we don't really have the resources that we need to try and test things. Big corporations do. They'll come out with a product, it doesn't work, that's fine. They scrap it and they move on. But what we don't really have are the financial resources or the bandwidth to really do big things to test what are the news and information needs of a young audience, or how do we help them build news habits. I grew up with print newspapers, with newspaper boxes at the end of the driveway, with newspapers everywhere you went, at the service station, at a diner. It was such an ingrained part of my life, and that was a lot of just brand awareness for news. News was everywhere. We have a generation that is going out into the world who haven't really had that. Could the Daily Tar Heel be a part of making sure that we're really building those news habits so that when people go out into their careers, that they have a sense of, now that I live in this town, I should be subscribing to their newspaper. I should be paying monthly for the digital access to that product. We could be a part of that. And I think that that's actually a really, really essential function of college media in helping to keep people really informed and to protect democracy by having people that are really informed. And I really wish that we had the resources to dig into that. Beyond that, year to year, it's operating expenses. That's what we need more than anything. Every once in a while, a grant opportunity comes around and we think, maybe this would be something that's good for us, but it's to fund a certain project. And that is really wonderful, impactful when you have that project that you need to do and you can find the right fit for that grant. What the Daily Tar Heel needs more than anything are operating funds that we can use how we see fit to pay our students more, to pay our rent, to keep doing the things that we need to do to survive.
After speaking with the Daily Tar Heel, despite them being described as a college newspaper, their concerns are similar to any other publication, with their main concern being revenue. As mentioned earlier, the COVID-19 pandemic is a factor that made a detrimental impact on the state of newspaper publications. The COVID-19 pandemic and recession have created what some describe as an extinction-level threat for local newspapers and other struggling news outlets. More than 1/4 of the country's newspapers have disappeared, leaving residents in thousands of communities living in vast news deserts. Despite this statistic, some newspaper publications managed to stay in business. One newspaper in particular had their start during this time.
We founded the Border Belt Independent in May of 2021. We have a staff of 3 full-time reporters, and we have two reporters who are full-time, an editor who is full-time, and then a part-time reporter. I'm the publisher, I'm very much part-time, and we have 2 volunteers. My wife Becky, who is our business manager, and my sister Stuart, who is our IT director. So it's definitely a family affair. The Border Belt covers 4 very rural counties in southeastern North Carolina. The demographics are very similar. It's Columbus, Bladen, Robeson, and Scotland counties. So I came from a newspaper background where we had deadlines every day, and we worked at night, we worked on Sunday nights. The great thing about the Border Belt is because we do in-depth stories, we can take all the time that we need. If it takes 2 weeks to do a story, and because we're online, we're not a printed publication, then it takes 2 weeks. And that takes some of the pressure off, like you would have with a deadline. So I would say we publish roughly 3 stories a week, but if we publish 2 a week and it's a better story and we just have 2, well, that's the way it rolls. So the Border Belt Independent is a nonprofit corporation. So there is no ownership, except all the employees take ownership in it, so to speak, but no ownership per se. So being a nonprofit, we're funded by different sources, grant funded, but no ownership. We do have a board of directors that we answer to. That's beneficial because we don't, one of our model, we don't have advertising, we don't have memberships, we're all supported by grants, so we're not answerable to any advertiser or pressure from the outside. It's really up to us to decide editorial policy and how we cover the news. So we are funded primarily by the Kate B. Reynolds Charitable Trust. We worked with them about 3 years ago. It's an interesting story. We were at an opioid forum in Whiteville, and a member of the KBR staff, KB Reynolds staff, and I were talking about all the good work they do and how could we make a difference. And we asked the question, so if KBR is doing this great work, but what happens if nobody knows about the work or even cares about it? So that was kind of the genesis for our idea. I wasn't aware of anything else like this was going on, so we had more discussions. So we're primarily funded by them, but I think it's important to note that we're completely editorially independent. They never ask. It's a completely independent situation. We do get some other grants through the year, but nothing that compares to that. That's a 3-year grant at $165,000 a year, and that primarily funds our reporting. Our biggest expenses would include our staff. That's about 80% of our expenses. And there are others like health insurance, liability insurance, the other 20%. We run a really lean operation, but I think we pay our reporters pretty well, all things considered. You're never going to get rich being a reporter or an editor, but we do try to keep up with what we think is fair. So we do a lot of collaboration, and this is part of our model. We do stories. We provide those stories to the 4 local newspapers in our region, in our 4 counties. There's a lot of financial pressure on newspapers. The financial model is not broken, it's close. So somebody has to go to those 5-hour school board meetings, and it's got to be those newspapers. The vacuum that fills that space when the community loses its newspaper is a really dark place. So we see this as kind of a symbiotic relationship where the little newspapers go to meetings and do what needs to be done with school, county commissioners, city councils. We provide them the more in-depth analysis and stories that a newspaper needs. When I was a reporter and you went to a school board meeting and something just didn't sound right, then you could take 2 or 3 days and check it out. But now they're just rolling from meeting to meeting to meeting. So if you hear something now that doesn't sound right and needs to be investigated, they can contact us, or citizens can contact us, and we do that in-depth reporting. We take that 2 or 3 days or that week or that 2 weeks, and then we provide those stories to them, and it's all free. All of our content is free, and we provide all of our content to the newspapers for free. We also have a really good relationship with the Assembly, which is a statewide nonprofit in Raleigh, and that's important because we cover our 4 counties, and that's primarily where our audience is. But when you partner with an online news organization like the Assembly, which is statewide, then we can have more impact. More policymakers get to see the stories that we're writing about. So that gives us more impact and more reach. So I think that's been a really good collaboration for us. News deserts are a real problem, particularly in rural areas. A lot of newspapers, a lot of counties don't even have a newspaper at all. We've lost 20% of our newspapers since 2005, so it's a real issue. And another problem is because the business model is so difficult for small newspapers, where they may have had a staff of 5 or 6, they may have 1 now. And so even though that may not technically be a news desert, it's getting pretty close. And as the model gets tougher, we really worry about that. So you wonder if the future is more grant-funded journalism, but we just can't have news deserts. We know what happens. It's really not, it's a really dark vacuum you have to fill. There are a lot of strengths and weaknesses. I grew up in my family's newspaper business. We had it, I'm sure, 3rd generation journalist. We've had it for 80 years. We sold it a couple of years ago, so I'm really familiar with being a rural journalist. The people are great. Although I will say that a lot of folks who live in rural areas are mistrustful of the media, so building trust is really essential. I will say this too, that when you live in a small town or a rural area, accountability is off the charts. Because if you make a mistake and you're in church or in the grocery store, after you make that mistake or you don't get it right, you're going to hear about it. So there's a lot of accountability. I wouldn't trade reporting in a rural area for anything. It has its challenges. It's a big area, but the people are pretty genuine, and if you build that trust, then they will trust you. So short term is to get more funding for a 3rd reporter, or really a 3rd staff member. So the Kate B. Reynolds Charitable Trust Grant provides us plenty of funding for an editor and a reporter, and probably part-time reporter or freelancer. It doesn't provide full funding for that 3rd reporter. So I took a leap of faith this year. Funded the 3rd reporter. So one of my jobs, one of my most important jobs, is to find funding for that reporter. And I think our work speaks for itself. I've gotten some pretty good feedback, and that's the primary short-term goal. Long-term, I think with 4 counties, we'd love to have 4 reporters. 1 person per county. But good or bad, raising money is a big part of it. That will allow us to get bigger and better, and when you do that, then you can have more impact. Our initial 3-year grant was an experiment for all of us. Kate B. Reynolds had never funded a news organization like ours. So at the end of that 3-year period, which just ended in February, just a month or 2 ago, was a good test of the feedback that they had gotten. What they saw us doing was what we were doing impactful for our community. And needless to say, we were relieved when I think we got an enthusiastic refunding for another 3 years. So, and 3 years later, if we do a good job, the hope is that we'll be there again. One thing that I'm pretty good at is I'm a lifelong journalist. I struggle with audience development. So it is a challenge to find new audience because we are a startup. We're a nonprofit startup, and that's a pretty tough place to come from. But it all comes back to the journalism. If you do great journalism, if you gain people's trust, those fundamentals of journalism, people will find you and your audience will grow. And when it grows, you have more impact. There's a lot to be worried about, honestly. We'll cover that first. The fact that we're called the enemy of the people, that there are threats to the First Amendment, the very difficult business model for newspapers, which are essential, the need for grant funding from a lot more sources is certainly that keeps you up at night. I worry about AI. We are already seeing in the campaign season where there are deep fakes, people's heads superimposed on other video, stories that are just outright maliciously wrong. That really worries me. When you hear from the people who founded AI, I think they're worried about it too. So we should all be. In terms of what am I optimistic about, well, that's pretty easy for me, actually. We have an awesome young staff, and they are engaged. They care about social justice, they care about the future, they care about the environment. If I'm optimistic about anything, it's that the young people, despite the medium pay, get into journalism to try to make this world better. I think one of the real questions in journalism, now that we're kind of at this inflection point of having this long-standing, profitable, private business model, to move into a nonprofit is going to be really interesting. We've already seen nonprofits like the Kate B. Reynolds Charitable Trust, which really just dealt with health issues, move into journalism. And we've seen private philanthropy move into journalism. So the business model is going to be a tough one to overcome. But will people step up because they care, because they see what's going on in our democracy, the threat to our democracy? Will private citizens step up and support organizations like ours? I think that's the big question.
Border Belt Independent not only diminishes news deserts in North Carolina, but they are diminishing these odds in rural areas in North Carolina. According to Penny Abernathy, 95% of local digital startups are located in urban areas, meaning that even rural and less populated communities with reliable internet access lack an online local news alternative. Despite having concerns like any other publication, Border Belt Independent serves as a role model for current and future publications. A reliable news coverage source should be available to citizens of any community, whether the community is considered urban or rural. A recurring characteristic that we have seen from these publications is being independently owned. Many local newspaper companies are bought by chain publication companies. Newspapers that survive the shift significantly cut staff and reduce circulation, while conglomerates like Gannett, Lee Enterprises, and Alden Global Capital have brought up huge shares of local papers throughout the country. I spoke with the Indy Week, who is also independently owned, but in a slightly different way than DTH and BBI.
I'm Jane Porter. I am the editor-in-chief at Indy Week. I have been in this role since 2021, but I've been at the Indy kind of on and off for about 10 years. I was a staff writer here before I became an editor. The Indy, we just celebrated our 40th anniversary. So the Indy was established in 1983, I believe. So now we exclusively cover the Triangle. Formerly the Indy did cover almost all of the state of North Carolina, but recently we narrowed it down to just covering Wake County, Durham County, and Orange County. I would say there are about a dozen people on staff. It's a combination of full-time and part-time workers. We have a business side and an editorial side. So the business side includes our publisher, and we have a couple people doing sales and marketing, and then the rest is editorial staff, so 2 editors, 3 reporters at the moment, and then we have a creative team, so our graphic designer, and she has an assistant. We have a digital publication, website, and print, yeah, so we're both. We publish a story, or probably a couple stories every day, so 2 to 3 stories a day is our goal. Our most successful stories are really localized stories, so they're on topics that people are already talking about, something that happened in the community or a prominent person. But our investigative stories also do really well. We do a lot of like accountability reporting on local governments. Yeah, so I would say investigative and community stories. It is independently owned. Our owner now is the Assembly, which we just transitioned into that ownership. They're based here in Durham. You may be familiar with them. They also have a network of newsrooms across North Carolina. So we're kind of the triangle newsroom of the Assembly. I think it's great for any newsroom to have independent or local ownership, just because you know the people who are running the show, running the newsroom and managing you. There's not like a degree of separation where your boss is maybe in another city and they don't know you at all. So just having like that close contact to the people who run the organization is great. It means they're really looking out for the best interests of the employees, making sure they have the benefits that they need for the job, and they know kind of the ins and outs of the daily operations too. So we are funded. There's a combination of traditional sales, so ads in our paper, on our website, and our newsletters. And then we also have a press club, which is our readers who donate money to the paper, which also just kind of supplements our operations. I would say the biggest expenses are salaries and benefits. We collaborate with the Assembly, which is our owner and partner newsroom. We collaborate with some nonprofit newsrooms, such as NC Newsline. We collaborate with the 9th Street Journal, which are Duke students, and also UNC Media Hub, so students at UNC. We republish their work. And then we do have a couple other newsroom partners too, which are mostly nonprofit newsrooms. COVID had a pretty big impact on the Indy. First of all, there was just the fact that we couldn't go to work anymore. We couldn't go to the newsroom in person, so that was happening remotely. And it's not too hard to run a newspaper remotely because most of it's done, our work is done on the computer. But of course, going out and reporting wasn't happening, in-person meetings weren't happening, events weren't happening. So it was kind of different in how we did our reporting. A lot of phone calls, a lot of Zoom meetings. I guess the ads weren't coming in as much because people didn't have money to advertise because they weren't operating. So we did get PPP loans, and that helped a lot. One of our big components is, as part of the paper, is events advertising. So there weren't any events happening, so we didn't have our calendar going, we didn't have events going on, so we took a hit there. But we've kind of come back now that, everywhere has sort of mostly returned to normal from COVID, so I think we're seeing a resurgence. Always, story quality. We want to be producing really good journalism. I think that's the most important. But then we've recently branched out into doing a newsletter. Probably in the past 5 years we started that, or several newsletters. We have a daily newsletter every morning that goes out, and we also have an arts and culture newsletter. So obviously that's just a big shift in how people consume news. So we've tried to stay on top of that, reach new readers that way. We have ideas about how to reach more, especially like younger readers who maybe don't read print as much. So we've got, some plans to get into social media more, maybe podcasting. So those are things that we're not doing yet, but we hope to be able to do when we have more resources. Audience engagement has changed a lot in the past 10 years. 10 years ago, I think we only had the weekly print paper, and that's how people read the Indy. We had a website as well, but it was more print focused then. And now I would say it's much more online focused. Audience engagement comes through social media, people coming to our website or Googling and finding our stories that way. In terms of the future, I would say we're most optimistic about growing. We are growing as a newsroom. We're able to hire more reporters and staff with kind of new funding mechanisms like grants. So that's exciting, having more people, having more resources, having more partnerships is enabling us to do that. I'm a little worried, or I'm very worried about whether people are still actually consuming news in the traditional sense. I know people get a lot of news from social media, from Twitter and Facebook. I don't think that's the healthiest way to consume news. So I'm hoping that we'll be able to figure out how to make that work for us so that people who consume social media are also consuming actual news when they go to those websites. For the Indy to thrive in the future, we are going to need to grow. We're going to need to find more readers in the Triangle, get them reading the publication regularly. We're going to need to grow our newsroom, get more reporters, get more resources. We're going to need to grow our press club, get more members donating money, and just getting more money in general is going to be key to thriving.
In conclusion, my main takeaway from speaking with these companies is keeping one's audience engaged with truthful and accurate journalism is key, while also having resources that aid in funding and audience engagement. 65% of Americans believe local newspapers have the resources and opportunity to report the news fairly and accurately. Newspapers are not competing with each other and trying to gain the most readers. It's not a competition at all. It's about providing reliable news to people and making sure the future of local news is stable and successful. With support from readers and companies working together, news deserts will be diminished and news will be available to those who don't have it.